Hey guys, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about one of the slightly complicated examples of the array functions in JavaScript, which is the reduce function. Many of time people don't use this because they find it sort of complicated, and I'll try to really make it simplified in this video. So as usual, first of all, I'm going to be starting off with what the method signature looks like. Now, do not really worry how it looks like. It's going to be very simple once we start seeing some live examples. So the reduce function is basically used for reducing all the array elements to a single value. So let's see how it works. We have the method signature in which we use the array.reduce function, and in the reduce function we pass in a callback function. The callback function takes in 4 parameters. The first one is generally called as the accumulator, but I don't like to use that word because it's too fancy and we do not really understand what's its meaning. So I just like to use a simple word called total. Then we have the current value. Current value is basically the index value on which the callback function is currently running. We have the current index and the actual array that's been passed. We can also pass the initial value over here as well. Now the main part of the reduce function and when to be using the reduce function is when you want to be getting or simplifying all the values and getting a single value out of it. So as you can see over here, it returns a single value of any of the types. So it does not matter you want to be returning an integer or a string or an array or an object, but it's going to be a single value. Okay, let's just take a simple example over here before we see the coding part. So in this you can see I have an array of ingredients and calories. So the ingredients is basically a bun, then you have the burger and some sauce, and the calories of each of the items are also mentioned here. Now we're trying to basically find out the total calories over here. Now just by seeing the example, I know that I need to basically be adding up all the calories in the different ingredients. So basically we're reducing all of this data into a single data, which is the total amount of calories. So in this we are running the reduce function. We have the total calories count, which is initially going to be 0. And then we have the ingredients, that is going to be this first object. So we're basically iterating over every single object in this case. And then we say the total calorie is basically equal to the sum of the ingredient dot calories. It iterates over every single items in the array and gets the calories and adds it up and store it in the total calorie variable. So in the return, we basically gets 140. We'll not get 140 calories, it's just going to be 140. So that's how basically the reduce function works. If it is confusing, do not worry. Let's see a code example. Okay, let's start off with some coding example for the reduce to make the concept more clear. Now I already have this code base opened up over here. You can find the link of this in my GitHub account in the description below. Now I basically have 3 kind of examples that we are going to be working with. So the first one is basically finding the sum of the numbers in the given array. Now this is a pretty straightforward example just to get us hands-on with the reduce function, see how it works and so on. We are expecting an output of x, which is the total of all the items in this array. So we are going to be first of all declaring a variable. Let's say const sum equals to numbers dot reduce. So the reduce function basically takes in a callback. You can either define the callback using the traditional function keyword and doing it like this, or instead you can use the arrow function as well. So I'm going to be doing it in the arrow function format. Now the arrow function is basically going to be taking in a couple of parameters. The first parameter is the accumulator variable, or I like to call it the total variable. So I'm just going to be naming it as total. And the next one is basically the current value. So let's name it current. Then we have the current index. So I'll put it as index, and then the array. Okay, so we just want to be finding the total of all these values, and let's see how it works. Now the total over here, or the accumulator over here, basically contains the value that is going to be returned to the sum. So whenever you're running the loop, you need to be basically returning the value of total. This is going to be acting as our local variable, which is going to be saving all of the values. So basically what we're going to do over here is say total equals to current plus total. Okay, let's see how this works. Basically we have an initial value of nothing right now saved into total, and current basically has the current index value, so the number of 1. Now when we are basically running the loop for the first time, we are calculating the total and we need to also return this value back. So I'm going to be putting over here as return. So this return basically gets returned and the value gets saved in this total. So if I just put it in a more pictorial way, so the initial value of total was nothing and then the current value was 1. So it's basically total plus 1. So we get a value of 1. Now this value of 1 basically got saved into the new total. So when we are running for the second time the loop, it's basically running on 2, and the new value of total is 1. That was the previous calculation. So for the second time it's going to be 1 plus the current value, which is as 2, and that gives us an output of 3. Similarly, when it runs on the next index, which is the value of 3, it's going to be basically taking up the previous value, which is 3 over here. So it's we say 3 plus the new value, which is again 3. So it becomes as 6. Similarly, it goes for the next one. It's like 6 plus the next value, which is 4. That gives us 10. So this keeps happening till we reach the end of the loop. And once it reaches at the end of the loop, so whatever is the value that you get, it's basically returned back to the sum. So it becomes sum equals to the final value which was returned after all of this calculation. Okay, so that was the theory. Let's see if the theory is correct by running this particular code. So I'll say console.log sum. Let me open up my console and I'll say over here node 05 array. So in this we can see that we got the output of 55, which is basically a total of all of these elements within the array. And we can just simplify this a little bit further by removing this curly brackets as well at the end, because we are just writing one line of code. And you can also get rid of the total and just have this code over here just like that. Now you can see it's very simplified, just a single line of code to make the total of all of these items right here. I hope you understood the concept of the total and the current value and how we are basically returning the total on every iteration after doing the calculation. So let's move forward and see what else the reduce function can do. Now earlier we were just returning a single value which gave us an output of 55. Now again we just have an array of numbers, but this time we are expecting an output of an object. So it's basically an object with the key of sum and the value of the total, that is the addition of all of this. So basically how we are going to be doing it, first let's uncomment this out and let's say const sum in object probably, and over here we are going to be iterating over numbers2 dot reduce, then same concept of the arrow function, and we are going to be returning something. Okay, so we again have the total over here and current value over here. I don't need the index and array for now, so I'm just disregarding that. But let's just see how to be working with this. Okay, now we want to be returning an object. So we need to basically be having an initial value of total. So we need to basically be making sure this total is in an object format and it's of the same type as we are seeing over here. So what I can do is whenever I want to be assigning a default value to the total, we can be passing a parameter after the callback function by pressing a comma and then giving it an initial value. So it does say over here number, but does not really have to be number. It can be anything. So I'm going to be putting up an object over here and I'll put it as sum as 0. Okay, so that's about it. So if I just try to return total over here just like this without doing any calculation, because we have to always return the total if you remember. And if I just try to console.log this, so I'll say console.log sum in objects, and let's try to run this quickly. You can see that I basically get the initial value returned over here. So we know that the total is definitely getting assigned the initial value. Okay, let's do the calculation now. Instead of returning the total, I want to be this time returning an object, and the object is basically going to be sum of the value. So here I need to be basically doing the calculation and passing in the value. Over here I can basically say total dot sum plus equal to current. Okay, so basically we are doing the calculation and this time we are doing it within an object just like that. So that's about it. If I just try to save this and try to run it once again, we can see that we get the same output, but this time in an object format, that is the sum of 55. So that's about it. Just remember that whenever you want to be assigning a default value, it can be a string value, it can be array value, anything, you also need to be passing in a second parameter like this. Okay, let's step up the game further and see a little bit more realistic example what you're going to be seeing in real life when you're making a web application. Okay, I have a drop down menu of items returned from the backend. Okay, this backend returns me a data that looks something like this. So it returns me the country code and also the country name, just like this. So you can see we have the United States, we have the United Kingdom and Australia along with the country codes. Now the requirement of the dropdown that I'm implementing it on the website is it needs an array that looks something like this. Okay, so how can we implement this? First of all, the question might come to your mind is, when you're just given up this array, should I be using the map function? Should I be using the reduce function? Or should I be using the filter function? What should it be? Whenever you have that question in mind, always remember what is the output that you want from that array. Do you want the same number of items that are there within the array? In that case, you want to be using the map function. Do you want to be removing some of the items from this array? In that case, you want to be having the filter function. And if you want to be having just a single item returned from this entire array, as it is in this case, we have a single item which is in the array format. Now the format obviously does not matter, but it is a single item with multiple country names. So that's why we know that we need to be using the reduce function here. Okay, so let's try to play with this. I'm going to be uncommenting down this variable over here, country dropdown. So let's try to create the dropdown over here. So I'll say const dropdown equals to country dropdown dot reduce. Same thing, we are passing in a arrow function and we're getting the parameters as total and the current value. Now I know in this case the total keyword or the total variable that we have declared here does not really make sense. You can call it whatever you want. Some people like to call it the accumulator or total or whatever. So it does not really matter what is the name of the parameters, whatever you're comfortable with. In my case, I generally like to call it total. So this is the value that's going to be returned back to the dropdown. Okay, now we also know that we need to be returning an array over here. So we need to be basically defining or giving it an initial blank array to the total. So here I can say comma and an empty array. So as we have seen earlier, if I'm going to be just returning the total over here, we are going to be getting a blank array which is going to be passed on to the dropdown. Okay, so with that done, let's see how we can be basically accumulating all the values of the name in this total. So here what I can do is I first of all have to return an array. Now in the array, I need to be basically passing all of the values that we have in the total as well as the current value. We need to be pushing it into this array. So there are different ways of basically accumulating when you have an array. One of the ways is basically using the spread operator. Now we know that the array is going to be having multiple values in that and we need to be basically having all of those values in this new array as well. So what I can do over here is I can say dot 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 and then I say total. So what this will do, it will basically copy all of the values in this total which was there earlier in the variable, and it's going to be basically adding all of those in this new array. So I also need to be pushing the current values name. So I can also put over here as current dot and over here as name. So basically what this does is returning an array, and in that we are first of all copying all of the values that were there earlier and also putting in a new value in this from the current object. So that's about it. If I just try to log this, so I'll say console.log drop down and let's try to run this. So I can just say node app, and in this we can see that we have all of the value listed out over here. Now the other ways of also copying this total into the new array, but you can use some underscore library or you can use your custom function. Now generally we use the spread operator because it creates a deep copy and it makes sure that your new array has all the values in case your object that is there within it is quite complicated. So I would highly suggest to use the spread operator in this case. So that's about it for the reduce function. I hope you found this useful, and if you do, I'll be very happy if you drop in a comment, and also you can tell me how we can improve further. Thank you.